this what I'm going to present you now is part of a book that I am going to work. It's dedicated to remembering the Soviet past in Georgia, and this part will deal with the role of history and historiography in taming memory. We will see how this is going on, so I hope I can. So I will have a short introduction, so within 10 minutes, of course, I'm very limited. Conceptualizing historiography in transition and the role of history in memory politics. Then I will describe 3 strategies of nationalization that have been applied since the 1990s or even earlier, thanks to Georgi Maisuradze. You have seen how the master narrative is working and applied. I'm trying really to focus on the role of the historians here, and then I have propositions, questions instead of a conclusion really for the discussion also this afternoon. So, conceptualizing historiography. It's very important really that we understand what we are talking about. When we are talking about memory politics, we contribute to the principles of historical sense, of creating historical orientation in the broader society, and understanding that this chair that comes very much from this field of the practice of life. Really, the production of memory and memory politics follows certain functions and interests that we have to understand when we are looking how political actors are applying certain elements, or how they are interpreting or reinterpreting the existing master narrative. Ideally, in a modernized society, history should provide concepts that are really helping to say what is, what makes sense in the terms of a scientific approach towards the past, transforming memories into a narrative that is based on aspects of interpretation, certain theories, methods of research, and forms of representation, so how the story is told by the historian. All of them underlie certain paradigms, as Thomas Kuhn already described very well, and these paradigms very often are not explicitly discussed. And as we have seen in Georgi Maisuradze's presentation, there is also no awareness of what they are applied by political actors, but without really any question. The question is, where are the historians really trying to say, this is bullshit? This is something that does not apply to what we know from the sources that came to us. Okay, so I have to move on. So there are certain strategies. This is what should be really researched. So far, unfortunately, we do not have much of it. So, from socialism to nationalism. First strategy, renovation, how to regain and prevent missing and or suppressed historic experiences. Second is reconstruction that tries to establish a clear understanding of order. That is very important, so like with the transference of Ilia Chavchavadze from a secular Marxist-Leninist into a religious national one. So from the supranational to the national level. And then I have nationalization, then the attempt really to publish it and to bring it into the broader society through textbooks, history courses, monuments, and so on. Really, what is a part of memory politics? This is from Peter Niedermüller. Really, I think we need such kind of conceptual frame if we want to understand what is the specific of memory politics in Georgia, different from Azerbaijan or Armenia, for example. One concrete example is the standard that was created in Georgian historiography, Saakashvili's Histories Narkovevi, the sketches of history of Georgia, the standard that was describing in 8 volumes the history in the way how Georgian academics wanted to have it presented and how it was approved by the authorities. When we see and I looked at this, was the audience, were students or were academics, were people, researchers, were the target audience of these 8 volumes. In 2004, 2012, we had 2 editions of Sacradeus Historia, Toma, in 4 volumes. And we can see, so it's not here with the editors, because they were academicians, and these were the teachers of Marikolonki, Panidze, and so on, who reproduced. Also, you see, it is indicated that they are all academicians. But the target audience here was the broader public. So they tried, and I compared how the structure of the first book was and how it is presented in the book that is published by Litera for 50 lari or something, really, in several thousand copies, that try really to push their interpretation as the only one in Georgian national history to the broader society. So there are 3 objectives according to what I used from Niedermüller, really empowering for a return to a national history of Georgia. So keeping out everything Georgi presented very nice, what does not belong in minorities or interactions, the influence of the Middle and Near East and so on. This all was forgotten in these textbooks. And this is really the one and only history. So there is no dispute about that. There is a possibility to have other interpretations or something like that. No. Liberation from now what was framed as foreign Soviet socialist part. And this Soviet more and more shifted from Soviet to Russian. This is also what has been discussed already, but reproducing from Stalin period a black and white structure, us versus them. The communist world versus the capitalist world. Us, the Soviet Union, them, the United States, and so on. And so this was only put from a supranational level, from an international level, down to the nation-state legitimation. That should replace one authoritative master narrative by another one. But as my research showed, without real structure changes. So we can really find that the second book, in its content, all the Marxist terminology was taken out, but the structure was the same. It was well edited, so more comprehensible to a broader audience, and so on. And this is one of the reasons might be the renovation that Georgian historians are relying on a very restricted toolbox that is not so much interested in introducing new approaches in research, but legitimizing the nation and the nation state as an ethnic cultural entity, not as a civic one. Yeah? This is the inheritance, and this is not discussed in historiography. So we find a lot of new sources, but few syntheses that are trying also to capture how history has been written. A lot of individual new topics show up: Menshevik Democratic Republic of Georgia, especially last year, emigration, church and religion, to a much lesser degree the Soviet period, so that the presentation of the Soviet part is something as a foreign oppression, repression, but having no impact on the social development of this country, of this society. But we have to keep in mind, Georgia was an agricultural society that became industrialized and modernized during the Soviet period. So what was the impact of these changes of modernization in the Soviet period? Silence. Yeah? So we have really very few innovative conceptual approaches. I think Leila will talk about gender history, social history, history of political ideas, how they have been appropriated, and so on. This is still work to be done to pick up or to close the gap with the international research in historiography. So inside the academia, and I really read a lot of Soviet and new materials, Soviet paradigm was discarded, the so-called formation theory, formaziata teoria, openly rejected, but if you look inside, you see the Georgian nation is conceived as a collective, homogeneous whole, replacing the class from the formating theory. So it shifted the explanatory criteria, were just shifted from the class narrative to the nation narrative. Then we have actors' agency. If I look in both of these history books, there are no actors. Where is the agency? Where are the people that are suffering, that are aging? We have, of course, we have some heroes and we have victims, but we have no social groups that were acting, that developed, and so on and so forth. Totally missing self-reflection. How did the Soviet regime impact on historiography? Instead, we have often personalized approaches, memories, and so on, but not really, I should not say no self-reflection, there were some, but they were heavily marginalized, like also Sovlab today in the historiographical sphere, emphasizing Christian medieval Georgia as a part of Europe, neglecting all these other ones, so interaction with Iran and so on, where is really a huge point that can be really critically reassessed. Of course, we have Oriental studies, but they are also somehow marginalized. And we have very limited internationalization, besides all the announcement we are European and so on. But internationalization is really also taking into a narrative, into an explanatory framework, concepts from outside and to look really what is the specific of Georgian history. So while we have inside the academia very little progress, if we go outside, we have a lot of new things. Women's history, Tasso Foundation, Boell Foundation, already 20 years ago started with also with biography and history workshop together with Owen. We have Sovlab collecting people's memory and publishing them online. Collaboration with Archival Department, IPFI, Institute for Development of Freedom of Information. So we have a lot of new material that is now in movement, but we do not have new synthesis, a new narrative that could replace this overcome master narrative. And so the point is where we have to start discussion with why is it that? Yeah, and if I see you are nodding and Guyana is nodding, so there are similarities in the problems that are here, and they certainly are to some degree related to the past, to the Soviet past. Yeah? So, okay, I have to move on. Interestingly, also Nino Kharatishvili's book about the AIDS life that made its story in Germany, so it became popular in Germany, and then only because it was so successfully abroad, it became incorporated and translated only 2019 in Georgian. So where you can see a lot of new approaches come in from Georgians living outside. Georgi Maisuradze's book, Sunny Georgia, Zoniges Georgian, also not translated into Georgian yet. So all these issues that are coming outside the established academia in Georgia, outside the society. Of course, all three South Caucasian societies are small societies, and you know each other. It is very difficult to say something critical about somebody who is your neighbor, so to say, yeah, in your society. Okay, this was the renovation. Then the reconstruction. If there is no history, we are facing the danger that our memories are turning into nostalgia, like this painting by Levan Shugoshvili, Georgian aristocracy, in the Georgian Art Museum on the Rustaveli. Yeah? So, interest agency. So, the imposition of clear understanding of order, I think I do not have the time to go through this. really what Ivan Javakhishvili introduced as advocacy science in an article in 1902 to establish Georgian historiography as European historiography, to write scientific, true history, is something really that is still valid today, because the historian himself, I would say, perceives him or herself as a legitimizer of the national past. And then, so what you described, Georgi, it started already in the 19th century, and here I would say Georgia was on the European wave of nation-building processes. So up to 1921, it was really part of Europe. Even if it was at the periphery, but it participated in all these issues. But in the Soviet period, we had a different direction that it took due to the political environment and also, the political development in the Soviet Union. The only historian that I found was really critically asking and demanding a critical reflection of the role of historians and historiography was Guram Koranashvili, an outsider because he defended his dissertation at the Institute of Marxism-Leninism in Moscow, and returned and then was marginalized at the Institute of History, Ethnography and Archaeology, Ivan Javakhishvili History. So he was the only one in the early 90s who tried really to instill some kind of, what did he do there? Until today, besides these articles, I'm very much looking forward if you can name me some others, so I would be very grateful for that, but fear among historians of losing their illusions, where you have also to keep into mind, it's not only about what the historians were writing, what they were saying, but also how they were saying it. Because historian, with the underlining academician, they had a high status. And with the transition period, historians lost this status. And this re-edition of history of Georgia, oh yes, is something, a signal that they are longing for regaining such a status. So when we do research, we need to research about the habitus of the historian and the practice of writing history during the Soviet Union. I'm sure we will find some really treasures that have not been assessed yet because we were sidelined, not in line with the political period. Okay, I will skip this. There were some disputes in historiography about the interpretation, leaving the national line of explanation, and so on. This leads too far. But then, in this dispute, this Koranashvili, who was fighting for critical reflection, was attacking Zazana Bashir, who was trying a more regional approach to medieval history, where Christian identity was the main marker and not ethnicity. Yeah. Okay, so and the result is what we can see here. Yeah? So, if you have a decontextualized history, then your own topic of research really takes on and becomes more and more over-exaggerated as it really was. Yeah? So, nationalization, last part, integrative narrative for national identity. Dominant approaches is here really nation as a sole collective actor, and us versus them continued, now really very much Georgia versus Russia, individual only as heroes, besides really that there is a lot of new material, oral history, photographs, letters and so on that really allow for other forms. But we do not have the concept how to transform these materials into a new narrative. And of course the state that very much relies on this and uses it because it's this kind of memory politics, symbolic politics, is cheap. It does not have any consequences. So Saakashvili could speak to the Americans praising George Washington, but on the other hand giving his oath at the grave of David the Builder in Gelati. So he was what we would call code switching, because nobody asked for the consequences. Yesterday I was asking Tamar Karaya about if there was a written policy, because that you could hold the political actors responsible for what they are doing. there is not such a policy. It was, as she confirmed, something very tactical. So really quite obvious. But again, where are the historians saying this is not true? To the opposite. Historians were contributing, writing a new history of Russian-Georgian relations and so on, really filling in, and in that really assuming that they could regain the status that they had during the Soviet period. So, becoming really the sole authority to tell the true past. But this is already not working any longer because we have civil society actors that are challenging it. The only thing is that they say, this is not scientific. So, downgrading its value as a contribution to science, to research. This is something that needs still more research. So in the end, we could say really that historians contribute not to history writing, but to creating, sustaining, and adapting cultural memory. And so it means they are contributing something instead of taming memory and taming the politicians, making use of the past. Okay, so challenges ahead. So we have really this serious problem with the renewal of historical disciplines, autonomy of historical science is questionable, comparative, inclusive approaches, comparing also the neighboring republics or something like that. So far, not really only focused on the own set point. So the questions for my conclusion, the questions for discussion that I would give really, what are the limitations of contemporary history and historiography in Georgia? Why are there no narratives or synthesis about the recent past? So the most recent is only coming up. How to reconnect with existing sources? How can oral history contribute to a new research agenda about Georgia's recent past, or contemporary history? From where should we start to build such a research agenda, and what do we need to start with? What topics to focus on, and who would be willing to contribute to what's sense of research agenda? Because if we do not continue, then only we have to rely on the arts, because in the arts, in the cinema, we have much more progressive approach that are thematizing these issues, like in Irma Sharikadzi's photo series about the dictatorship of ideas, where you can see, so Georgian national symbols are under the flag, and there are other pictures really reclaimed, really very well presenting this what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. So the coexistence, the ambivalence of different elements without any critical question. And this ambivalence will continue. Okay, so this was my presentation.